that gets called by estate agents a highly desirable place to live. And the consequence of that, of course, is that we've got very high house prices. And I've just indicated some of the aspects of the village which contribute towards those house prices. Of particular interest, I think, is our access by rail to London and our easy access to Bath, Bristol, Swindon, all of which obviously attract people who are able to live some way from their work, at the moment increasingly so. We're on the southern edge of the Cotswolds with a population of 1,700, although it's probably a bit bigger than that now. And we are surrounded by green belt and an area of outstanding natural beauty, as well as being in a conservation area. So this is what Marshfield looks like. You can see from the high street that it's sort of 17th, 18th century houses that stretch right down through the high street, which is sort of like a spine around which a number of new groupings, estates of houses have been built. And I did lay on a tractor so that you'd know you were in a rural community there. The bottom photograph shows you the village spread along the high street, basically, and it stretches in a linear way along the high street, and it's surrounded by what are very attractive little valleys. This one, for example, is within sort of 3-4 minutes of where I live on the edge of the village. And we've got lots of those valleys around us, which adds undoubtedly to the popularity. The next slide shows the shape of the village. The red curve is the A420, which is effectively now a bypass to the village. To the north is the South Cotswold, edge of the South Cotswold escarpment. And then the bulk of the village is to the south. And one of the things we learnt very early on was that any attempt to build on the north side of the village was viewed by South Gloucestershire, our local authority, as very problematic. Partly, I think, because the amount of traffic on the bypass would have meant every time you came to the village, you'd have had to cross that, unless it was a big enough development for a bridge or something. So that's the shape of the village, and I'll return to that when I talk about our site selection. So what I've done is I've identified that in the process we've been through, we've gone through 6 different stages, of which we're coming towards the end of 5 and hoping to get going on 6 shortly. And I'm going to talk you through those various stages and what it's meant for us as a community and for a CLT. And it has been inevitably, I think, for these sort of activities, with quite a number of challenges, quite a number of problems, but it's also been very rewarding because we've had a lot of support from the village community. So how did we start? What led to the CLT? And we started actually with what was a very unpopular move by a developer to build at the top end of the high street in an area which was leading down to a rather beautiful valley. It's called St. Catherine's Valley, and it leads down eventually. You can walk down through there to Bath. And there was an attempt to build at the top end of that, and it was viewed as sort of the opening up of the valley, I think, to eventual development. And there was a lot of objection, and there was a petition, and I know petitions are problematic, but there was something like 700 people who signed this petition saying, we don't like this development. And eventually the developer, along with, it had been working with the parish council, but I think the developer and then the parish council accepted this was not going to work within the village. And they withdrew their application and their interest, but it still left behind what those of us living in the village were aware of, which is that local people who've been born and brought up in Marshfield, attended the school, work in the village and so on, that they aren't now able to buy houses. I was lucky in that I moved to the village 52 years ago, and there were lots of little old properties that needed to be done up and that you could buy for a very reasonable sum. And they've now escalated beyond anything I could think of buying. Well, I could think of buying something now, but it wouldn't be what I was able to buy then. So this position of homes for affordable people prompted a member of what I've called the resistance to act very much from the fact that he'd been involved in some activities in Bristol which had highlighted CLTs. And he got a meeting with the parish council and with the Wessex Affordable Housing Advisor. And he came up and talked to the parish council about a CLT, and that led to a village meeting. And it was led by the parish council chair to discuss setting up a CLT. And the CLT was seen as something that might attract the village, because rather than it being developer imposed, it was going to be community led. It wasn't for profit, so there wasn't any of that sense of what do they think they're doing, coming in here, taking over our village, and so on and so forth. It can organise things so that there's priority for people with local connection, and it's able to do this and hold those assets for the benefit of the community for posterity. And all those three issues have been really very important for us in our project as it's developed. Now, I've shown you this particular slide because it shows the leaflet that the individual concerned put round to every house in the village. Possible to do this in a village. I'm not sure if you'd want to do it in Bristol. Although areas of Bristol, of course, break down into the equivalents of villages sometimes. The point about this, I think, is that it indicates how one person with an idea, with a sort of dream in their thoughts, sets about trying to change things. It indicates that we'd already got the Marshfield Parish Council involved and on board for it. We had a speaker from South Gloucestershire Council who came along, so the council's knowing about it all. And we got two people from the Wessex CLT project, Steve Watson, who's the Affordable Housing Advisor, and Alison Ward, who was very much involved in the organisation and construction of CLTs. We didn't have here the two councillors, district councillors, who over time have been very significant for us, but it's got some key players there right from the very beginning. So following that meeting, there were enough people who said, let's go for a CLT. And a steering group was set up from everyone who wanted to join. As you left, you were asked to write down, did you want to join the steering group? And if you did, invitations were set out, and we set up meetings which Steve Watson chaired originally. So we decided right at the beginning, there we were, a motley crew of people, self-selected. Surprisingly, given that I've been in the village in a long time, I didn't know a lot of the people. I hadn't worked with them before, in spite of being involved in various village activities. So we tried to say, what are we about? What are we trying to do? We are trying to avoid this sort of activity, which I'm sure you've all been in meetings, where what you've had is someone desperately trying to sort out people rowing in different directions. And there were times when it didn't seem very easy. I came across this quotation in the early days, which I very much liked, although I don't believe it, of course. To get something done, a committee should consist of no more than 3 people, 2 of whom are absent, because getting things done in a group is quite often difficult. So what we did was we decided what were our basic values and purpose, and you can see them here. And those of you who are aware of CLTs and have heard about them during the day will recognise them. Benefit of the local community, housing needs and sustainability, not-for-profit, perpetuity, democratic model, community-led, and so on. But to do that, we went through quite a long process, and we did have this quite complex mission triangle, which was trying to identify our overall aim, specific aims, objectives, and values. Now, that's very much particular to us. Another organisation would do things very differently. But it did mean that we spent some time saying, what are we about? What are we trying to do? And that's remained very important and helpful for us. We also knew that we had to have a structure and formal processes. Now, I've talked to people about CLTs in other places who've said to me, you know, you don't need all this structure stuff. You don't need formal processes. You just need people to get together. But you actually do, because you need to have credibility and you need to be a legal organisation. You have to have financial legitimacy and accountability because you're dealing with big money and big projects. And then there are the ways you work in the village. And we decided early on that we would keep confidential our discussions, and anything we said to anyone in the village stayed within the CLT. And as well, right from the beginning, and this is very important, you have to ensure there's no conflict of interest. At the beginning of every one of our board meetings, we have that sort of agenda item just to clarify that there's no conflict of interest, because that goes around and is so destructive so quickly. So what did we do? Eventually, the steering committee got its papers together and we registered as a community benefit society. The board of directors initially were formed from the steering group, but in 6 months' time, they have to go out to election. We then developed all these formal processes and policies, which you may say, surely you don't need all those. But we've already, for example, on the equal opportunities and safeguarding policies, we've already been asked for those when applying for grants. We also set up working group criteria, standing orders. We had some real conflicts early on with difficulties with people in the community and within our initial board. And we clarified just how we thought people should behave and made sure that people were not working against the interests of the CLT. We set up a website, which has been really quite important. It's a nice website. It shows the church poking above the trees, and anything of any significance we put on the website. And it means that in communication terms, we often will say on Facebook, our affordable planning application is going in, look on our website. So we use Facebook often as signposting. So there we are. We're all going in the same direction, rowing all together nicely through the teamwork that we evolved. I like the quote. It talks about a common vision that allows common people to attain uncommon results. And I think that's true. We were just all members of the community hoping to work together. So we moved on to our very important activity of finding a site on which we could build the initial project, which was to make affordable homes for rent for local people. The outline pink on the north side of the bypass, that's the curve you can see. We abandoned those fairly quickly as South Gloucestershire made it clear they weren't going to allow those. The ones in the centre of the village were fairly few because it's quite densely built up. So the other 30, the majority of the 31 sites are around the settlement boundary. And we then had to think which of those did we want to approach to say, would you like to sell us your land for a CLT project? And we did that by mapping the sites against South Gloucestershire criteria, to which we added our local knowledge. And we eventually had 7 owners, which then expanded to another 4, who we approached to say, this is what we are, this is what we're about. You're sitting on agricultural land, which is never going to get planning permission. It's in the middle of Greenbelt. We can offer you at least some money to buy the site. That's better than nothing. Are you interested? We're your only hope, you know, all sorts of things. We did this very carefully. We sent the letters out to everyone at the same time and said, if you're interested, please get back to us. In that process, we actually came across the fact that South Gloucestershire Council would only permit the local priority for residents to be on rural exception sites. That's not true with all councils. So if you are thinking of a CLT, you might want to check what your council views as possible to give local priority in terms of allocation. So we took out all the ones that were within the settlement and moved just to those that were surrounding it. Just to remind you, those of you who don't know, rural exception sites are within the national policy guideline framework, national framework, well, I can't remember which order those words go in, but it's within the national policies as well as local policies, that the needs of local communities in rural situations can actually be encouraged to put rural housing in areas which wouldn't normally allow housing to be bought, because it's about supporting the sustainability of the community as well as addressing affordable housing. And you can go for you can build on the rural agricultural land if you've got these criteria. Demonstrated affordable housing, we had a housing needs survey that did that. Community-led, yes, there we were. Legal obligation to limit those to homes with local communities, that's what we wanted to do. Not very big, we weren't doing that. And then lastly, and this is very important for us, the policies also say you can have some market housing if it facilitates the affordable housing. So we fitted all those criteria. But after 2.5 years of going round being so polite and nice and confidential, we couldn't find a landowner, owner who wanted to make a deal with us. So we sort of tore our hair out because it was very frustrating. We were being careful and cautious and trying very hard to meet our values and behave in ways that we felt the village approved of, and so on and so forth. And we by then had a membership of 170 people and we weren't getting anywhere. So we stood back and we said, right, we've got to do something different. So we put our thinking caps on, put the lights on in our little heads and came up with a different approach. It involved two key issues. We said we won't just look at settlements against the boundary. Now, the rural exception site does say it prefers settlements that are adjacent to the boundary. So we were a bit concerned about that, but we were able to say to anyone who asked, look, here's the evidence. We've got all our notes, we've got our evidence. No one wanted to talk to us. And we also replaced the financial model that we've been using, where we were saying to landowners, would you sell us some of your land for a CLT project? We replaced it with a different sort of incentive. And we said, would you be interested in, as it were, transferring some land to the CLT, and in exchange, we will procure for you some plots which have planning permission. And this would be in areas where no landowner would have ever expected to be able to get planning permission on their site. So we went back round the landowners again, the 7+4, and we reached an agreement. And in June 2018, we agreed with the landowner that he would transfer 1.6 acres to us when planning approval was achieved. And that is a very important caveat, because the whole scheme works on the basis that you go forward in good faith, but with the agreement that the land will be transferred to you when planning approval is achieved. So in that sense, there is no risk in this model. And in return, the landowner was to get the 3 service plots. So we set about developing this site for 18 houses, 10 affordable housing for rent, 2 shared ownership. And then we had a third of the plot for market houses, 3 of which were used for subsidy to help the affordable houses, and 3 were for the landowner. So we took that to a village meeting. We'd had other village meetings, but this was an open village meeting at which we presented this position to the village and said, right, this is the option we have. Are you willing to support it? And to our great delight, we had overwhelming approval. And there I am in the middle. I've decided I'm the middle penguin with the little purple bow. But we were so pleased because we had no objections at all. And we had 2 or 3 people who abstained because they couldn't quite understand the process, I think, because it is quite complicated. So you might think we would have been feeling delighted, and we were, but in some ways you then are into the next stage of what is also pretty hard work. So we move to the stage of developing a planning application. Now, in order to do this, and remember that we don't buy the site until the planning application is approved, to actually get the planning application up together, we wanted to do, well, you need to do a feasibility study. And the areas that were of particular significance are the ones I've entered there as where we commissioned reports. And in order to pay all those, we put in a bid to Homes England for the feasibility study. In fact, we then went out to tender for all these various reports, and in all cases, we went out with a set sum. We took the experience and the evidence from the Affordable Housing Advisor for Wessex, who'd worked across a number of CLTs in the southwest, and we went for that fixed price contract. So we were then able to ask Homes England for that money, and they let us have it. And we have had to keep to that very closely, and you have to it was divided up into 4 periods of time, and you have to account each time very carefully for what you've done with the money. So one of the things that we had to do, of course, to get to a planning application was to appoint an architect. And we appointed a company called Reed Watts, who are London-based, but had someone also working in Bath. And they did the job of pulling together all those reports and eventually submitting the planning application. We again went out to tender to, I think it was 6 architects and interviewed 4. We went out to tender for the housing association partner, who's a key part of this particular model. And we have appointed United Communities from Bristol, who have been working with us ever since. And the process works that the transfer of land is made from the landowner to the CLT. The CLT then leases the land to United Communities, who fund the build and manage the tenancies. So again, the level of risk for the housing association is effectively nil, whereas if United Communities get it wrong, it would be a significant risk. So ever since that early stage, we've been working with both the architect and United Communities. The freehold of the land remains with the MCLT, in spite of the fact that UC are leasing the land. It ensures perpetuity of affordable housing. And the lease contract with United Communities allows for points at which, if it wishes, the MCLT can claim that housing back. We gave these priorities to the architects. The first 2 were particularly important for us. We wanted social rents. Affordable rents in our village was just still not affordable for lots of people who we knew needed somewhere to live. The energy sustainability issue, we started off almost hesitantly about it because we knew that it involved extra cost, but it's been one of our top priorities. The others are the sort of things you would expect for somewhere in a rural community. So those were our priorities. And there we all are. And we had regular meetings between the architects, who are the 2 young people in the right-hand corner, United Communities, us, every single one of our board was on this meeting, the landowner, who is not in the photograph, but the 3 members of his family who are concerned also came to the meeting. We had consultants, and we had Steve Watson as our affordable housing advisor. And you might think, how did they get anything done with all those people? But you can see on the table in front of you, there's an outline of a sort of model. And we had models and we had discussions, and we relatively easily came to a lot of decisions, but there was a lot of technical stuff. And the next slide is really just one I came across, because we talked a lot about risk and about financial viability. What could you build, such as the sustainability issues of the housing? Was it financially viable to have them? How do you manage that thing between risks and build? And this person who says, I don't understand these risks, he echoes what many of us thought on occasions. Our final design reflected the agricultural model. We're next to a farm, and you'll see in a moment why that was important. The 3 houses up in the top left, those are the 3 houses who are going to the landowner. The other houses are a mix of shared ownership, rented, and houses which will be sold on the market. And it follows that agricultural barn model. You can see from this picture, the site is the red outline, and you can see we have a gap between us and the village. But that gap actually is the school. And just at the far left, where that white line is, that's actually pointing to the community centre. And you can also see towards the south to the left, there is Withymead Recreation Field. So although we are not next to the village, we are in some ways very well connected for the activities of the village. You can also see why the architects wanted the agricultural barn model, because immediately to our right, you can see a whole sequence of barns. And to the north of us, you can see another sequence of barns. So we haven't tried to mimic the groups of housing which are closest to us in the village. We've gone for the model that reflects the environment in which the houses are going to be built. And the two inset photographs show you the site. The first one to the left shows you the track at the edge of our site, and the one to the right shows you what is currently ploughed field and will become our affordable housing project. We drew up the plans and we took it off to another village consultation, and there we all are. I'd assumed we'd do sort of these big structures with plans all over it, but in fact the architects went for this V-shaped design, which was just set on tables, and it worked ever so well because it was small scale and people wander around it. Up at the counter, I see myself in a blue shirt there, and standing next to me with his back to you is the man who got it all going, really. So we were offering drinks and biscuits, and people wandered around and talked. And it was a very successful consultation. And the plans were endorsed wholeheartedly again by the people who came to see it. A lot of support for the sustainability issues, because by the point we'd reached here, we were going for what was called a fabric first approach, which was very much about sustainability. The support we got from the village on this consultation event led us to eventually push for passive house standards, which is what we've gone for and which our South Gloucestershire Council has encouraged us in and is giving us a specific grant to support. So then we went through this process of planning, application in, allocation criteria determined. We got approval with conditions, of course, in May 2020, which we were delighted about again. We then got finance and grants. We got the construction tenders out. We got the tenders in and they were financially viable, which is something, you know, when you're looking at something like this. The tenders came in between what United Communities had decided was the viable amount. And we thought things were going so well. And then we went wham. We sort of had a real intake of breath because we actually came across what often happens, which is the devil's in the detail. And these are just 4 of the issues which have occupied us over the last 2 months. The legal process has taken a very long time. There are 4 solicitors involved in one of the documents. So every time anyone changes 2 words, there it goes, round it goes again. There's the lease between ourselves and United Communities. There's arrangement to transfer the site from the landowner to MCLT. There's the leases for United Communities for their leasehold and the freehold for the 3 that have been sold as market plots, and so on and so forth. So that's taking a long time. We're coming in off the main ring road, or bypass really, and that has meant that we've been asked to do some more work to ensure maximum safety. We've been asked to do more than is necessary for any other entrance into the village, but things move on and people become more concerned about health and safety, so we're not surprised. Then we hit a problem with the sewage system, which is going to be for a water treatment system. That, in the end, has turned out to be problematic because the ground is very porous, and we are actually now having to have a pumping station, and drains will have to be dug down through to the main sewer access. All the time, our grant deadlines have been looming, but we now don't think that's a problem and that they will be extended. So, we are still anticipating that we will start on site March and April this year. As I said, oh, happy day. It'll be wonderful when we do that. we actually see something going on the site. At the same time, I don't believe that the timescale has been that much greater than the other CLTs that we've known about, because it is a long process. So by March 2022, we hope houses will have become homes, the dream will have been realised for ourselves and for other people moving into it. So just briefly at the end, I've identified what for us, and it'll be different for every organisation that does community-led housing, what for us have been so significant. And I start off with something that's been so important, which is professional hand-holding. The help we've had from our affordable housing advisor, Steve Watson, has been essential as far as we're concerned. Our clear aims and objectives have kept us all together. We've had the credibility and legitimacy of the CLT. We got support early on. We got to our planners within a week or so, I suppose, of being set up, saying to them, will you talk to us about what we want to do? This is it. We got to our councillors. We got to the parish council. That was very important. The partnership with the Housing Association, our model, couldn't be done without it. We've had very good ongoing communication with members and community. So all that's been essential. And I've just added a little sort of PS that while we've been doing all this, all those things are actually very helpful in thinking of the next project, because it doesn't necessarily be an affordable housing one, but these have taught us all sorts of things. So this is what we've all gone through. This has been our timeline, and we are coming towards the end of it. It looks a long process, but affordable housing is a basic right. So I think from where I started, the trials and tribulations are worth it. And I'm going to finish with a quote which I came across, which I like. Without ambition, one starts nothing. Without work, one finishes nothing. The prize will not be sent to you. You have to win it. And on that call to action, I'll stop there and see if we have any questions.